Welcome to Life Stories, where every journey is unique and filled with unexpected twists. Today, we bring you a tale of ambition, hard work, and the power of change. Follow Emma, a humble cleaner with dreams of becoming a teacher, as her life takes an unexpected turn when she crosses paths with Ethan, a CEO living in a world of wealth and power. Through struggles, self-discovery, and a chance encounter, both of them will find themselves on a path they never imagined. Join us as we dive into their story. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to begin today's journey with Life Stories. The morning sun had yet to rise when Emma's alarm clock buzzed at 4:30 a.m. Cutting through the stillness of the pre-dawn hours, she groggily reached for it, silencing the relentless buzz. Another day had begun, another long shift ahead. Emma had learned to live in a world where every day was marked by exhaustion. But it didn't dampen the quiet fire inside her. As a cleaner at one of the city's largest corporate offices, her daily routine was far from glamorous. Mopping floors, dusting desks, scrubbing windows, these tasks were all part of her job. But it was a job she had come to accept, even though the long hours and monotonous work left her feeling more like a ghost than a person with dreams. Emma's world was confined to the hallways of the office building, never stepping into the grand executive floors that housed the city's elite. It was a place she had only visited during her routine cleaning shifts. Yet even then, the sight of polished wood and sleek, expensive furniture made her feel out of place. Her plain uniform and worn sneakers felt like a stark contrast to the opulence that surrounded her. But Emma never complained. Her life had not always been like this, though. Before the loss of her parents and the responsibility of supporting her younger siblings, Emma had been a bright student, dreaming of teaching. The idea of standing in front of a classroom, guiding young minds, had once felt within her reach. But life had a different plan. Her siblings, now grown, lived in other cities, and Emma found herself alone in her small, modest apartment on the outskirts of the city. The only company she had were the textbooks she borrowed from the local library. Books that helped her keep the dream alive. Even after a long day of cleaning, she would sit at her kitchen table, her eyes tired but focused, preparing lesson plans for a life she wasn't sure would ever happen. It was a dream that kept her going, but at times, it felt like a distant memory. The weight of reality pressed on her, aching feet, sore hands, and an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. She didn't allow herself to think about a life outside of this routine. But deep down, she longed for something more. The thought of becoming a teacher seemed too far out of reach. Yet it was the only thing that kept her from feeling entirely lost. One particularly grueling day, Emma found herself pulling a double shift. One of her colleagues had called in sick, leaving her to clean the entire building alone. The extra hours only added to the weight she carried. But she didn't complain. She moved from floor to floor, her body screaming for rest. Yet she pushed on. Her tasks took her to the executive floor, a place she rarely ventured, where the offices of the company's top executives were. She cleaned the desks, wiped down the windows, and polished the floors, feeling both invisible and out of place in the world of power and wealth. Emma had never seen the inside of the CEO's office before. The oversized leather chair behind the mahogany desk stood like a throne, an emblem of the power contained within those walls. The room smelled faintly of expensive cologne and polished wood. It was all so foreign to her. Yet she carried out her tasks with the same dedication she gave to every other floor. But by the time she reached the CEO's office, her exhaustion had reached its peak. Her body ached from hours of scrubbing and cleaning, and her feet felt like they could give out at any moment. She glanced at the chair behind the desk and, for a moment, felt an overwhelming temptation to rest. Just for a minute, Emma told herself it would be okay. Just 5 minutes to recharge. She sat down, allowing her body to lean back, her muscles relaxing for the first time that day. The chair felt like a cloud. So soft, so inviting. The hum of the air conditioning in the background lulled her into a state of calm. And before she knew it, her eyes fluttered shut, and the exhaustion took over. Unbeknownst to her, the building was slowly emptying as employees left for the day. The quiet hum of the office became a distant echo as the world outside continued. Unaware of the young cleaner lost in dreams, In that moment, Emma felt nothing but peace. Her dream of becoming a teacher, a life far from the one she was living, seemed possible again, if only for a few fleeting minutes. She didn't know it then, but that moment would be the catalyst for a chain of events that would change her life forever. And yet, at that time, Emma was blissfully unaware. It was several hours later when Ethan returned to his office. He had stayed later than usual, caught up in the whirlwind of business meetings, emails, and decisions that had become his daily existence. As the CEO of one of the most successful companies in the city, his life was a constant blur of boardrooms and deadlines. But tonight, he found solace in the quiet of his office, the stillness of the space offering a moment of respite from the demands of his role. Ethan pushed open the door, expecting the familiar emptiness of his sanctuary. But as he stepped inside, his eyes froze on the figure slumped in his chair. Emma, the cleaner, was fast asleep, her head tilted to the side, her breath soft and steady, unaware of his presence. For a moment, Ethan stood in the doorway, completely still. His mind raced as he processed the sight before him. He had never encountered such a thing, someone, particularly a cleaner, so comfortably settled in his private space. His first reaction was irritation. Who dared to invade his office like this? His gaze moved over her, taking in the unremarkable sight, the plain uniform, the simple ponytail, and the hands that bore the marks of hard work. Emma's exhaustion was written all over her. Yet, there was something about her that caught his attention. Despite the obvious signs of fatigue, there was a certain peace in her expression. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself facing someone who, in that moment, seemed utterly free from the world he had constructed for himself, someone who was not here to seek something from him, but merely existing in her own space. He hesitated, caught between annoyance and something else, something he couldn't quite place. Part of him wanted to wake her immediately, to tell her to leave, to remind her of the boundaries between their worlds. But another part of him, a part that rarely surfaced, felt a strange flicker of empathy. He watched her, his usual frustration softening as he wondered about the life that had brought her to this moment. What kind of world did she inhabit? And how had it led her to seek solace in his office? His thoughts were interrupted as Emma stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and the realization of where she was hit her like a freight train. "Oh, I'm so sorry, sir," she stammered, scrambling to her feet in a rush. Her face flushed with embarrassment. "I didn't mean to. I was just so tired. And Her words tumbled out in a frantic rush. She wrung her hands nervously, unsure of how to handle the situation. Ethan raised a brow, his irritation returning as he took a step toward her. His tone was cold, professional. "This is highly unprofessional," he said, his voice sharp. "Do you have any idea whose office you're in?" Emma nodded quickly, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "Yes, sir. I'm really sorry. It won't happen again." Her sincerity was undeniable, and for reasons Ethan couldn't fully understand, his irritation began to dissipate. There was something about her apology, about the rawness of it, that made him pause. "See that it doesn't," he replied curtly, turning to walk away without looking back. Emma hurried out of the office, her heart pounding with mortification. But even as she left, Ethan stood still for a moment, replaying the encounter in his mind. Her face, flushed with embarrassment, her words genuine, had left a mark on him. He couldn't understand why, but there was something about her that lingered in his thoughts. As the day wore on, Ethan found himself distracted. He couldn't shake the image of Emma's startled expression or the sound of her rushed apology. It wasn't often that someone caught him off guard like that. He had built a life based on control, discipline, and the pursuit of success. There was little room for anything, or anyone, who didn't fit neatly into his world. Yet, for some inexplicable reason, Emma's genuine, humble demeanor had made him question that very framework. He tried to brush it off, reminding himself that she was just a cleaner. But as the hours passed, his thoughts drifted back to her again and again. Something about her had stirred a curiosity in him, one that he had long since buried under layers of ambition and professional detachment. He told himself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. Something about Emma had started to unravel the walls he had spent years carefully constructing. The next morning, Emma woke up with a mixture of dread and humiliation weighing on her. The memory of her unexpected nap in Ethan's office played over and over in her mind. A loop of embarrassment that she couldn't shake. She had spent hours last night convincing herself that the incident had to be a one-off. Something she would laugh off once she got back to work. But today was different. Today, she feared the worst. That she would be reprimanded. Or worse, fired. The thought of being sent home was As she arrived at the office, she braced herself for the inevitable fallout. She expected cold glares from her coworkers, whispers behind her back, and, perhaps, a stern reprimand from her supervisor. But to her surprise, the day passed without incident. Ethan had not reported her, and no one seemed to be aware of the awkward encounter from the night before. Yet, Emma couldn't ignore the quiet whispers that floated through the air as she worked. She overheard snippets of conversation between her colleagues. "Did you hear Emma was cleaning Ethan's office last night?" one said. "I bet she got an earful from him." Emma tried to ignore them, keeping her head down as she went about her duties. But the anxiety gnawed at her all day. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself preoccupied with the memory of the previous night. He had tried to push the image of Emma out of his mind, focusing instead on the work that awaited him. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop thinking about her. There was something about her that intrigued him. Something beyond her role as a cleaner. Her sincerity, her humility. It was unlike anything he had encountered in his high-powered, business-centric life. As the CEO of a successful company, Ethan was used to encountering polished, ambitious people who always had an agenda. But Emma was different. She was unassuming, almost invisible. Yet there was a quiet strength in her that seemed to stand in stark contrast to the polished facades he was accustomed to. Later that day, Ethan caught sight of Emma again as she worked in one of the common areas. She moved with quiet efficiency, her attention focused entirely on her task. It was as if she were lost in her own world, completely unaware of the subtle glances he was casting her way. Ethan found himself watching her from a distance. His thoughts conflicted. He had no reason to care about a cleaner. After all, she was just another employee doing her job. Nothing more. And yet, there was something about her that made him question his own assumptions. Their paths crossed once again when Emma, carrying a cart of cleaning supplies, accidentally bumped into Ethan. Her eyes widened with surprise, and she quickly stepped back, muttering an apology. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice soft and nervous. Ethan frowned but didn't lash out. Instead, he simply replied, "Be more careful." His tone was sharp but not unkind. As Emma hurried away, her eyes downcast, Ethan found himself watching her with a strange sense of guilt. He had spoken to her harshly, but something about her demeanor, her quiet humility, made him question why he had reacted that way. Emma, for her part, felt the sting of his words. It wasn't the first time she had been spoken to in such a way. But this time, something felt different. There had been a flicker of something in Ethan's eyes. A brief moment of vulnerability that she couldn't quite place. It made her wonder if perhaps he wasn't as cold and distant as he appeared. But she quickly pushed the thought aside. She was a cleaner, and he was the CEO. Their worlds were far apart, and nothing was ever going to change that. As the days went on, Ethan found himself increasingly distracted by thoughts of Emma. He noticed her in the halls, in the corners of the office, always focused on her work, always with that quiet determination. He was drawn to her in a way he couldn't explain. There was a rawness to her that he found refreshing. Emma didn't hide behind the polished masks that so many people in his world did. She didn't seem to care about impressing anyone. She simply did her job. And she did it well. One evening, as the office was beginning to empty, Ethan had an idea. He needed someone trustworthy to assist him at an upcoming charity gala. A high-profile event with wealthy donors and business associates. It wasn't a glamorous job, just logistics and coordination, but he thought Emma might be perfect for it. It wasn't as though he expected her to impress anyone at the gala. But there was something about her steadiness, her reliability, that made him think she would be good in a setting like that. The next day, He approached her as she cleaned the executive floor. Emma looked up in surprise when she saw him, unsure of what to expect. Emma, Ethan said, his tone measured. I need someone to assist me at an upcoming event. It's outside of your usual duties. But it's a paid opportunity if you're interested. Emma blinked, caught off guard by the offer. The idea of being in a room full of high-powered people terrified her. She wasn't sure she belonged in that world. But the chance to step out of her routine, even for a night, was tempting. I'd have to check my schedule, she said cautiously, trying to mask the nervousness in her voice. Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. Let me know by the end of the day, he replied. Emma wasn't sure what to think. The idea of working alongside Ethan at a gala felt like stepping into another world. A world she didn't belong to. But there was a part of her, a quiet part, that wondered what it would be like to be seen in a different light. To see herself as something more than just a cleaner. And so, after much deliberation, she decided to take the chance. By the end of her shift, she made her decision and walked up to Ethan's office. Her heart racing, she knocked on the door. And when Ethan looked up, she met his gaze with a mixture of determination and hesitation. I'll do it, she said simply. Ethan's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Good, he replied. Be ready by 7. Neither of them knew it yet. But this event would be the beginning of something neither of them had ever anticipated. A shift in their lives that would change them both forever. The evening of the gala arrived. And Emma found herself staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the simple black dress that Esther had lent her. It wasn't much compared to the glamorous gowns she had imagined the other women would be wearing. But it was the best she could afford. The dress hugged her frame in a way that made her feel both exposed and powerful. A reminder that she was stepping into a world she had always been too afraid to enter. Her hair was pinned into an elegant bun, and she wore a small silver necklace that her mother had given her years ago. A piece of jewelry that now seemed to carry more meaning than it ever had before. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. Her mind raced, uncertain of what to expect at the gala. She had never been to an event like this before, an event filled with influential people, many of whom would never give her a second glance. The thought of being out of place made her stomach twist. But she reminded herself that this was just a temporary role. It was an opportunity to earn a little extra money. And perhaps, just perhaps, she could catch a glimpse of the world Ethan inhabited. When the car arrived to pick her up, Ethan was waiting, as composed and immaculate as ever. As she stepped inside, she could feel his gaze on her. A brief, assessing glance that made her heart flutter. You look fine, he said simply, though his tone seemed softer than usual. Emma couldn't tell if it was a compliment or just an observation. But she nodded, grateful that he hadn't criticized her appearance. She was already nervous enough as it was. The venue for the gala was nothing short of breathtaking. A grand hall adorned with glittering chandeliers and ornate decor. It was everything Emma had imagined when she thought of the wealthy elite. She felt a wave of anxiety sweep over her as they entered. The eyes of the room seemingly turning toward them. To her, it felt like she was the only one out of place. The only one who didn't belong. She clung tightly to the small notebook Ethan had given her, which contained the evening's agenda. Her fingers gripped it tightly, trying to steady herself as she moved through the sea of unfamiliar faces. Despite her nerves, Emma managed to keep her composure during the first hour. She followed Ethan's instructions, helping him with small tasks. And although she felt the weight of all the eyes on her, she kept her focus. But disaster struck when one of the servers accidentally spilled champagne on her dress. The sudden attention felt like the spotlight was on her, and her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She tried to laugh it off, but the humiliation lingered in the air, making her feel more out of place than ever. Ethan, noticing her discomfort, excused himself from his conversation and approached her. Are you all right? He asked in a low voice, his concern barely audible over the buzz of conversation. Emma nodded quickly, though her flushed cheeks betrayed her embarrassment. To her surprise, Ethan handed her his silk handkerchief. Don't let it ruin your night, he said quietly, his words offering a moment of unexpected kindness. Emma smiled faintly, grateful for his gesture, and managed to carry on with the evening. But as the night wore on, she couldn't help but reflect on what had just happened. She was used to being overlooked, ignored, and dismissed. In her world, people didn't take the time to show concern, especially not in a setting like this. But Ethan had noticed her discomfort. He had seen her, not as just a cleaner or a temporary assistant, but as someone who mattered. It was a realization that shook her to her core. The gala progressed, and as Emma observed the interactions around her, she couldn't help but marvel at how effortlessly Ethan navigated the social dynamics of the room. He moved with authority, his tone shifting between charm and professionalism as he spoke with various business associates. Emma, though still on edge, began to see him in a new light. He wasn't just the CEO, the powerful, untouchable man she had assumed him to be. He was someone who understood how to balance power with grace, who could command a room with his presence but still show compassion when it mattered. Emma's thoughts were interrupted when one of Ethan's colleagues, a sharply dressed woman named Veronica, made a pointed comment in her direction. "Is she one of the waitstaff?" Veronica asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "She seems a bit underdressed." Emma's heart sank at the remark. But before she could respond, she straightened her posture, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I'm Mr. Ethan's assistant for the evening," she replied firmly. "I'm here to ensure everything runs smoothly, not to be judged on my attire." Veronica raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback, but Emma held her ground. Ethan, who had been watching from a distance, nodded in approval. For the first time, Emma felt like she had reclaimed a small piece of her dignity. And the realization was empowering. She wasn't just a cleaner, and she didn't have to apologize for who she was. In that moment, she found the courage to stand tall and be seen. Later, when the evening began to wind down, Ethan pulled her aside. "That was impressive," he said, his voice carrying a hint of respect. "Not many people would have handled Veronica like that." Emma smiled faintly, though her heart was racing. "I've dealt with worse," she replied with a quiet confidence that surprised even herself. As the night drew to a close, Ethan and Emma exchanged a look of mutual understanding. The distance between them, once defined by their roles in the office, had begun to close. Neither of them could have predicted how this night would change them. But one thing was clear, it was a night that would mark the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. Emma, for the first time in years, was beginning to see herself in a different light. And for Ethan, the night had stirred something deep within him, a recognition of a life he hadn't yet fully embraced. As time went on, Emma's life began to change in ways she never imagined. Her decision to pursue her teaching certification had not only rekindled her dreams but also strengthened her sense of self. No longer just the cleaner in the background, she was someone with purpose. Someone who was carving out a future for herself. The support she received from Ethan, though unexpected, had become a turning point in her life. Their connection, once tentative and uncertain, had blossomed into something much deeper. Ethan, too, found himself evolving, no longer bound by the cold, isolated life he had built around his work. He began to open up, allowing vulnerability and connection to shape his future. On the day of their wedding, surrounded by friends and family, both Emma and Ethan stood together, ready to embark on a new chapter. The bond they had forged, through trust, understanding, and quiet moments of empathy, was stronger than they ever could have predicted. It wasn't just a union of two people, it was the coming together of two worlds that had once seemed so far apart. As they exchanged vows, Emma realized that the journey she had begun as a cleaner had led her to a life far more fulfilling than she ever could have imagined. She had found love, purpose, and, most importantly, herself. Together, she and Ethan would continue to face life's challenges, knowing that their bond would always carry them through. Thank you for following Emma and Ethan's journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to keep up with new videos from Life Stories. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next one.